So welcome everybody this morning. Nice to see you. We record all of our daily online talks and then put them into a podcast. Weekly, we do the updates. So if you ever miss a day and feel like you want to just check it out, you can go to Apple Podcasts, Reflective Meditation podcast. I didn't mean to do a bit of advertising there, but it kind of came out. So our talk this week, Nelly and I landed on the topic of superiority. And when we did our writing, which she read yesterday, I tied it to privilege and really wanted to look at, is superiority connected to privilege? So privilege, of course, a definition first, because I think it's relative. There's no one stance where you can say privilege or not is absolute. And it is similar to superiority. It's connected to an object, to something. So it is to give an advantage to one person or a group over others, or to give something, simply just give something more importance than other things. So those two simple definitions I'm going to lace a little bit throughout my talk this morning, because in my meditation I started to kind of list my own privileges. White, I'm a white person, middle class, educated, TSA approved, and I couldn't help but put that in there for some levity because I just am thrilled that I don't have to take my shoes off or things out of my bag when I go through the TSA checkpoint. But with a little bit less levity, I couldn't add woman to that list until recently. And in the last few blogs, Heather Cox Richardson, an American historian, she also she does quite a few blogs. Her recent ones have been about superiority and privilege. And I really like when our topics overlap with other people that I'm reading. And she talked about our female ancestors not being able to vote due to male superiority. And one of the nuggets that changed it was Woodrow Wilson's fear of losing the next U.S. presidential election. And he appealed to his congressmen this way: shall we admit them, women, only to a partnership of suffering and sacrifice and toil, and not to a partnership of privilege and right? And that helped convince some of the other men at that time. And yet it shows how deeply ingrained it is for us to take advantage of others when we're in a position of power. This is a really deep trait that's hard to wear away. And it's easy to forget equality, diversity, inclusion when we advance to a privileged position. It's a hard thing to remember and to enact. And it really can feel hopeless at times. Though at that time, 26 million American women won the right to vote in that 1920 election. So that was a huge change. But it does bring me to the other question we proposed in our writing, which is, how does this instinctual tendency to perceive experience through the lens of superiority, how does that wear away? So I had to go to more personal before I could actually go to a larger example. When I was in my senior year of high school, my parents granted me the privilege of being able to stay out late. I could stay out as late as I wanted, as long as I kept my grades up. So I was still living with them. I was under their care, their house, their rules. And I can still remember the feeling of wanting to be free from them. I was done with them, from the strict religious rules that I was brought up with and the kind of responsibilities of as an eldest daughter. And when they granted me this privilege, they warned me not to take it for granted. They said I'd be the role model for my brothers and sisters who'd have to wait until they got into their senior year for this privilege. So it's an interesting memory for me in regards to superiority, because as a teenager, I suffered from low self-esteem, but I had a wellspring of superiority that came out with this privilege. In my mind, not having to be home at a certain hour gave me the freedom to be a free agent in everything, not just the hours I kept. So I started to have more fun. I started drinking. I started dating. I started planning getaways. And there might have been a minute that I used the privilege wisely, but finally my parents, minute, thank you for smiling at that one, Susie. But my parents finally sat me down and they said, we're taking away the privilege because I'm abusing it. And as deftly as anyone trying to keep their advantage, I argued and debated with them constantly. My grades were better than before. I was going to be out of the house and go to college. This was good practice for me. This was good preparation. And then they couldn't take it away from me before I graduated, because once I'm granted a permission, you can't take it back. I'm entitled to that now. And so I won at that time. I actually debated my way to keeping that privilege. But by the time I was actually given the privilege from the government to drink legally, I also won a problem with alcohol. So I wasn't able to give up that privilege until my late 20s, when I surrendered, or used the phrase hit bottom, and admitted that giving it up was better for me than the constant inability to use it unwisely. Constant inability to use it wisely. So hitting bottom is another way that we talk about facing dukkha. And again, I looked up the phrase because I've used it throughout my history. And it originated in the 19th century among miners, where it meant that, oh, 1 second, I'm just going to mute one thing. There we go. Okay, thanks. Where it meant in the bedrock of a mining operation, when you've reached a place that you can go no further. There's nothing else that you can do. And the phrase has become a common part of our language, used mostly to describe when someone's lost all hope, or lost the ability to navigate or move, and really has nothing left to lose. So I wasn't able to use that privilege wisely. The privilege actually brought me more dukkha and created more harm. So in the 20s, when I gave up drinking, it wasn't because it was wise, actually, at the time. It was because I couldn't bear the pain of continuing to do what I was doing. I just couldn't keep going that way. But eventually, it became a wise choice, a healthy choice, something that provided me more freedom. And I wanted to continue not drinking because it really was a better way for me to live. And how did that happen? So how do I answer the question of how does this, inherent way we start to privilege ourselves or become more superior with privileges granted, with advantages that we have? How do we, wear away the tendencies to misuse them? I don't know, actually. I just know that at some point, facing dukkha seems to be the start of that. And we talk about that in our practice. And the other thing I know is that I continued to practice. I continued to meditate and reflect. And that continuing and wanting to continue to go in that direction is something that I hope emerges when we face the dukkha and the pain of something that's causing harm. So using our privilege in a skillful way, I think, is really important. And also, skillful is part of practice. We have a high value on developing something, that we may start it awkwardly or not doing it well or gracefully at first, whatever it is, to improve our lives and the lives of the people we live with, but that we will develop more skill as we continue. Thank you for listening. Nice again to be here with you all, and I will now meditate with you. We'll do 20 minutes